So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. It's really nice to have you today with us for today's event and today's conversation with Rama, Christopher, and Minnie. And on behalf of our speakers today and the RSA US team, I'd like to thank you for joining us for this month's US Salon, Creating Leadership Through Inclusivity, which I hope promises to be a really fruitful and very rich conversation. So before we get started, I'd like to give you a little bit of a background on the RSA US, and just cover some kind of ground rules or etiquette about today's event. And especially for those of you who aren't familiar with our virtual events and format, it hopefully will be helpful. So founded in the UK, we are the Royal Society for Arts, Manufactures and Commerce, and have been uniting people and ideas to resolve the challenges of our time since 1754. And today, the Society exists as an international fellowship-driven social change organisation. We are committed to a world that is resilient, rebalanced, and regenerative, where everyone can fulfil their potential. Our proven change process, rigorous research, innovative ideas platforms, and unique global network of 30,000 change makers work collectively to enable people, places, and the planet to flourish. Of the roughly 30,000 fellows spread out around the globe, about 1,100 live and work here in the United States. And RSA US exists to coordinate fellowship activities in the United States with an aim towards moving the needle on addressing the inequities of our society. So before I turn things over to Rama and our speakers and introduce everybody for today's event, I just wanted to go over a couple of different bits and bobs for you all. So as I said, the event is being recorded and that'll hopefully be a valuable resource for those of you who are attending today, and also for those of you who may not be able to make it or have to drop off a little bit early. But this is an informal, it is an inclusive space. Please do ask questions. Feel free to come off mute, or put your video on if you want to chat to us and ask us questions in the Q&A portion of the event. No question is a silly question as well, and we really just welcome your feedback in this conversation. Please be respectful. I think that goes without saying. So use language that your mother, your mum, or as an Irish woman, I always say your mam would approve of. And I'll always boot people out if they don't use respectful language, so be warned. This is a very, as I said, collaborative and formal conversation, but just bring that spirit of collaboration to this space, free from judgment or monopolizing the conversation. I think that's always something to be really mindful of. And please respect each other's time, boundaries, and feedback as well in this space, especially if things come up as we're talking about leadership and inclusivity. The chat is available to you to raise points of clarification. As I said, no question is a silly question. Feel free to ping me directly on the handle that you see under my name, or just pop a question in the chat. And hopefully that will be it for now. But I am delighted to introduce our speakers and give you a little bit more context of who's here and what we'll be talking about. So Rama Gheerawo, FRSA, is the director of the Helen Hamlyn Centre for Design, Royal College of Art, RCA reader in inclusive design. Rama is an international figure within design. He won a Design Week Hall of Fame award in 2019 and was named a 2018 Creative Leader by Creative Review alongside Paul Smith and Bjork. Oof, that's some list. I love that. I don't think I knew that, Rama. That's amazing. He addresses diversity across age, ability, gender, and race. He is a serial innovator in the field of inclusive design and design thinking, having led over 100 international projects with government, business, academia, and the third sector with clients such as Samsung, Toyota, and Panasonic. Champions creative leadership, having trained thousands of people, including over about 750 civil servants. Wow, that's amazing. And he holds visiting professorships and advisory roles globally for businesses, new ventures, universities, awards, and initiatives, including D&AD, the Valuable 500, the RSA Decolonizing Panel, and the Global Disability Innovation Hub at London's Olympic Park. His first solo book, Creative Leadership, Born from Design, launched in March 2020 and is available on Amazon and from publishers Lund Humphreys. And I will be popping the link in the chat in a little bit so that you can read a little bit more about Rama's book. And there he is, spotlit for you all. And I will be introducing Minnie next. So Minnie Moll is the Chief Executive of the Design Council in the UK, the national strategic body for design. Since joining in 2021, she has led the organization's new mission, Design for Planet, which aims to support and galvanize the 1.97 million people in the UK design sector to put sustainability at the heart of their work. Minnie is passionate about culture and business with purpose, and her work with global innovation company What If won the Sunday Times Best Place to Work in the UK 2 years running. And in her time at the East of England Co-op, they won the Alzheimer's Society Business of the Year and returned millions of pounds back into the local community through their Sourced Locally initiative. She was appointed by His Royal Highness Prince Charles in 2016 as the Ambassador for Responsible Business in the East of England. And she's also a qualified transformational coach with a focus on supporting women in business and an ambassador for the charity Fresh Start New Beginnings. So welcome, Minnie. I'm delighted to have you here with us. I'm also going to make sure that you are spotlight for everybody so everyone can see you. And welcome, thank you so much. And lastly, Christopher Patnoe is the Head of Accessibility and Disability Inclusion for EMEA at Google. He leads Google's efforts around the accessibility product, people, policy and partnerships across EMEA with a particular focus on emerging markets. He has more than 25 years experience in the tech field, working at companies like Apple, Sony, Ericsson and Disney, where he's built hardware, software, games and services. His current passion is accessibility at the intersection of immersive technologies, XR, and consumer hardware. He is also the chair for the Immersive Captions Community Group with the W3C, is the Accessibility Working Group co-chair of the XR Association, and sits on the Board of Trustees for the American Foundation for the Blind and the GAAD Foundation. Christopher has a degree in music from UC Berkeley. So amazing. This is such a great panel of speakers. And also there is Christopher. Welcome. Lovely to have the three of you with us. I know, yeah, pressure's on. I'm going to stop talking and stop sharing my screen and hand over to all of you. Welcome. Thanks for your time. And I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Great. So thank you so much. And just to echo that, it's a great honor, a great pleasure to be here. And one of the things, I wanted to start off with just reading through the statement of why we're all here. Christopher and Minnie are two people whose work I not just admire, but really engage with. I've learned so much from the accessibility work at Google. The Design Council was instrumental in setting up the Helen Hamlyn Centre for Design where I work. So I really kind of feel it's a fireside chat where we are sitting in a virtual living room and with many, many friends kind of joining us from around the world. So I think that's the sort of spirit of the conversation. We've titled this Creating Leadership Through Inclusivity. And it's a sort of take on the book's title, which is Creative Leadership. But the description is this: we are witnessing the failure of traditional leadership across all areas of society. Christopher and Minnie, I don't know if we'll be naming and shaming many people here today, but I think we probably won't. We may be calling out behaviors, but none of us wants to appear on the front of a tabloid. Leadership seems confined to a select few with stereotypes abounding. It needs a rethink radically and immediately. Yet we continue to see mechanistic and reductive leadership in action every day. As a society, we need to look to more creative and inclusive models of leadership that allow us to expand our leadership to include unheard voices and to inject a little joy into one's day. And we'll be discussing three values in the book that are empathy, clarity, and creativity as leadership values for the 21st century. People often ask, where did this come from? It came from a gentle power of dissatisfaction as a creative that I didn't see many creatives in leadership positions. Yet when creativity is deployed in leadership, it hits the bottom line in a positive way. It creates solidarity, it creates community, it progresses. But creativity by itself is not enough. So what are the other values that balance it? And empathy also came up, and then clarity is the third, less studied, less understood value. One more sentence, and I'm going to ask Christopher and Minnie some questions and open up the discussion. But kind of thinking humanly, where did this come from? I describe myself as a human first and a designer second. But I always say that empathy came from being a human being. Creativity, well, that came from being a designer. And clarity, that came from an ex-girlfriend, actually. So we've all had that relationship where you wonder what on earth just happened there. And I jokingly say that because clarity is something that I think balances the other two. But we're going to start with a question of, if that description talks about leadership being exclusive So who is missing? And if we could go to Minnie first and then Christopher. So who is missing from the leadership conversation and leadership teaching, leadership application?
It is by no means the only answer, but I've got to start on women. And let me just start by saying, I already knew that in architecture, for example, only 19% of people working in architecture currently identify as female. So that's shocking, given 50% of the population are female. There was something actually in the design press this week, I think it was Design, and it was a gender pay gap piece. They've just done a gender pay gap analysis, and the pay gap in architecture is shocking. It's almost, the gender pay gap is almost double the national average of the pay gap. So it was just another piece. So just to start there, because it's such an important one, which may well come out later in the conversation. So we need more women leaders, and there's a whole load of kind of systemic reasons why there aren't. But then, without question, it is also about ethnicity. It is also about cognitive diversity and perception and perspective diversity. And actually, first top tip, Matthew Syed's book, Rebel Ideas, is really, really strong on that, because it highlights the blind spots you get, big blind spots you get in an organization of this groupthink. So let me pause there, but that's a start. But then also youth, there's other groups who are not represented in how we lead.
I think it's a great starter for 10, because when you think, the McKinsey diversity reports do show that, just the two groups that you've mentioned, if you have a well-balanced group with, that include women, you are 25 to 30% more likely to, your financial performance goes up by that much. And by ethnicity, it's over 30%. So imagine if you combine the two. So I'm going to throw another question back in a minute of why do we think that is? So whilst you ponder on that, Minnie, we'll go to Christopher.
Yeah,
so Christopher, who's missing?
I agree with everything that Minnie said, but I think there's also, and Minnie leaned into a moment about cognitive disabilities, cognitive differences, but I also think people with visible disabilities are not included very often because opportunities aren't there, schooling isn't there, so there's a lot of systemic issues why people with disabilities are underrepresented in leadership. But I think it's multifactorial. One is they don't have the opportunity, but also there are, and they hide it because the stigma of having a disability. So I think in reality, we probably have a lot more people in leadership with disabilities who just don't talk about it because they're not comfortable, because of their inherent bias against it, their fear of how other people would interpret them. So I think we have a lost opportunity for people with disabilities to actually step up and into who they actually are and express that fullness of self, and then become the leader that they really could be, because then bringing their whole self in.
And just a quick follow-up before I go back to Minnie is, did COVID support this? Because we see some things where everyone was on Zoom and it was a great leveler in some ways, a great enabler. Technology can be a bridge or a barrier. And you see some statistics that say there were more people with disabilities, registered and visible disabilities, as well as hidden ones in the workforce. Has that remained at a certain level? Is it breaking through any ceilings into the managerial, directorial kind of platforms?
I think the answer is yes, but it's so quietly, you don't really notice it, is the problem. Again, there's so much concern, there's so much stigma, and then the tools themselves aren't perfectly accessible. Zoom here is an excellent thing that allows people to be able to participate from where they are. Some people can't or should not travel to events because of illness, because of inaccessibility of venues. But then again, a platform like this, when they have automatic captions, if they're not good, it's confusing. But we don't want to have perfection be the enemy of progress. So something is better than nothing, but having that human interaction, that human connection, and it can make the technology better, which makes it possible for people to be more engaged and then thrive better in their careers.
I think, you know, it's something that really look forward to seeing some change. And I really hope that post-COVID, we don't take a step backwards, because I think that's incredibly important in leadership. I was going to ask a quick question of the audience, as you've been encouraged to type answers in the chat. I wondered, what myths of leadership have you come across? And you know, one of the ones I was told is firm handshake and a loud voice, which I'm an introvert, and a blue shirt, so I deliberately don't wear them. And I love what you're wearing, Minnie. I love your coolness, Christopher. No blue shirts here. Haven't got anything against blue shirts, but what are the things that we were told? And Minnie, could I come to you first to just build on that? What are the stereotypes of leadership that you've seen that you would like to see more examined or even dismantled?
Let me go straight into one of the really big ones for me, and it is this has been, in truth, mainly senior men I worked with in the first half of my career, that someone at some point told them to leave their humanity at the door when they came into the office. But this notion that somehow it is sort of unprofessional to bring your humanity, your warmth. We're going to talk about empathy, vulnerability, being human, being a son, a daughter, a mother, a father, a friend. And people that I got to know, who when you then had a drink with them outside work, you sort of thought, but you're really nice. Why are you such an arse, excuse my language, in work? And I think it is one of the whoppers. It is about people thinking that somehow it is weak or unprofessional or inappropriate to ironically, we talk about bring your whole self to work. And I've heard those same people talk about bring your whole self to work, but then they actually don't. They feel that they feel that that's separate. So that is one of the biggies for me. Some of the other things on leadership, you know, I will never walk into a room and sit at the head of the table. I will actively seek anywhere other than the head of the table. So this sense that you have the bigger chair, the bigger office, the head of the table, a whole load of really quite sort of physical statements, you know, is another thing I've seen and still sometimes see. And then, of course, there is the uniform. There is the uniform, the whether it's a blue shirt or a shirt and a tie. But actually, if you go to some business events still that are very male dominated, you are in a room with a whole load of men in suits and ties, and it's quite, it's changed, it's loosening up. But it is a uniform, and if you don't fit with that uniform, I think that is not inclusive.
And you know, is that suit something that we think, is that a costume of dominance? Yeah. Authority, dominance, professionalism. I think some people would self-reflect.
Look at the shoes, look at the watch, and you judge them for what they have, not who they are. I think there's truth to that.
And you know, I'm going to pull in some of the things that people are saying. You know, Rosina talks about soft skills are not important, and empathy is really often seen as a soft skill. And 10, 15 years ago, when we started this research, you were almost laughed out of the room when you started talking about empathy. You know, thankfully, we sort of stood behind the branding of the Royal College of Art and the fact that inclusive design was being written into policy and practice, and empathy was at the heart of it. Is empathy a soft skill, Minnie? And Christopher, will come to you in a little bit to just ask about how empathy is deployed in your life. So two different questions, two different panelists.
Empathy is just a key fundamental human strength. I would say. It's something that certainly you can build and work on. So I think it's just fundamental. I would, as an aside, add to that vulnerability. And again, top tip, Brené Brown. If people haven't read Brené Brown, read Brené Brown on empathy and vulnerability, or watch her TED Talks. So that sense of the vulnerable, by being empathetic, sometimes I think being vulnerable can really actually create a space where people feel it's safe to then also there be empathy. That, you know, that can be anything from I don't have all the answers through to a number of other things that might come up later. So I feel so strongly that you have to bring your empathy to work. And actually, Gallup research, something, you know, we're talking the biggest single body of research about colleague engagement from around the world. And again, they speak very highly about empathy, and it's about trust and care. And one of the key things that people want from their leaders, one of the most important things, is genuine care. And I would sort of, that my leader showing genuine care, and I would say that's kind of a proxy for empathy to some extent.
Yes, we like to think of, you know, empathy, compassion, kindness, sympathy. You know, an internet wit once wrote, you can tear up the HR manual and replace it with 2 words, be kind. And I think there's a sort of internet TikTok wisdom in that. But we see all of these things as different shades of red, you know, or different shades of blue, or just different shades of a color. And even sometimes pity can be quite a negative, you have a negative connotation, but if it gets someone to access a level of empathy with someone else, and I'm thinking here of projects we've done with migrant workers in the Middle East, where, you know, the people we were bringing to do the workshops were in a radically different situation. It's a starting point, but empathy has that equitability. One of the things there, Christopher, that Minnie talked about, really sort of looked at self-empathy as well. So how has empathy appeared in your life? What does it mean to you in terms of your professional and personal life? And does it mix? You know, are you the godfather at work and the Dalai Lama at home? How does it present for you?
I think it's critical to following the mantra of nothing about us without us. Empathy is sort of the opening the door to recognition that there's something here. But then you need to let the people who actually have the lived experience walk through, because only then can you understand what the problem really is. Say, for example, to use a Google metaphor, think of like street view. Only someone who lives on the street knows where the potholes are, knows where the curb cuts should be, and things like that. Yet if you're 5,000 feet up from an aerial view, you can't see that. You know that there's a problem someplace. That's empathy. You work with the community to get the actual lowdown, the street level view of what's happening. So empathy for me is the starting point of the process in terms of bringing people to the table. And then you have to have humility to understand that you don't know everything. So for me, it's the humility and empathy combination is what allows accessibility, at least in the work that I do, to be really resonant, because I know what I don't know, or actually I don't know what I don't know, which is probably more important to realize. I know what I know, I don't know what I don't know, and I need help to be able to understand what the problems are. I need help with the people who live in a world that wasn't designed with them in mind, understand what the problems are, what the solutions are, and then together we can solve that problem.
I think what you say reflects, I'm following you here, Minnie, by giving some thoughts to be put into the chat, but another great leader in this, of course, is Jacinda Ardern, and her 2018 interview with the New York Times is really worth reading, because she talks about empathy as a strength and as a personal strength, and the way you've described it, Christopher, as a kind of organizational strength, a strength in terms of the workplace. And it sort of leads into one of the other values, which is creativity. And I don't know who this is, but they signify in the chat as number 253000, very descriptive. I love what you wrote here. I work in leadership development, and despite all the evidence of inclusion, I continue to see in large organizations white intellectual men who project their ego as a show of strength. This is still our dominant world model in world politics too. So one of the things there is about the application of creativity and why are people scared of it? Are people scared of it? Another study by a forthcoming book by someone called Adam Kingle, that's K-I-N-G-L, looked at creativity, and he asked the question of CEOs, how important is creativity? 90% of them said yes, very important, and really important to our organization. Ask the workforce, the employees, the middle managers, is creativity employed in the organization? And 90% of them said no. So is there, and I'm sort of looking here at Minnie as the CEO of the Design Council, is there a radical change or any sort of change that we need to look at in terms of how we approach creativity? Do we need to see it as a leadership value? Is it educated out of us? Sorry, lots of questions in there, but why is creativity missing from leadership? I think is the essential one.
So building on the very stereotypical norm that the person in the chat mentioned, why is it that so many chief executives were finance directors? What is it about kind of Western society in particular that has been for decades the natural route to becoming the chief exec is you were the finance director? Is it therefore any surprise that we have had business working for so long around predominantly just economic value? It's important, of course it is, but business can do so much more than deliver economic value, and indeed should and must do more, social, environmental, etc. So I have always found it extraordinary why are most chief executives finance directors, not all. So, and I think part of it is that creativity has just not been valued in the same way. And the irony is, and I loved this example from someone, don't know where it came from. A finance person in a cricket match is the umpire, they keep the score. The batsmen and women are the ones who hit the runs. And I would liken the batsmen and women to the creatives, the innovators, the thinkers, they're the ones innovating and creating the thing, the service experience. The finance is keeping the score. So I think creativity has just not been valued in that way. And then for those people, if you think quite a lot of the people who are leading are very much driven by the finances, creativity can go wonky, it can fail, it's sometimes hard to measure. So it kind of all of those things that make someone like that wobble are some of the reasons the creativity doesn't actually play out in the organization.
If I may, I'd like to extend this one bit, because I also think, at least in an engineering context that I live here at Google, it is much easier to plan and execute to a plan, and it's really difficult to plan creativity. It's really difficult to understand when the inspiration is going to hit, when is it going to work, and can you actually execute on this vision that you think is going to work. So many of these chief executives want to have a plan that they can relate and see, are we on track? But you can't do that with a creative process.
Yeah, and often it gets reduced. We tried creativity, on a Thursday in 1982, and it didn't work. And Christopher, you've worked in Apple, Disney, and Google. Sort of hugely creative organizations. But what are some of the myths and the barriers? Not necessarily needing to name from those companies, but in the world that you've worked in, accessibility and technology, does creativity make its mark? Is it even a conversation?
It is, but it's sort of caveated in different organizations. So for example, when dealing with engineers, they'll say, this is a really creative solution. So some people wouldn't think of software development as a creative art, but it can be. Something can be efficient, it can be lovely, it can be thoughtful. So engineering can be creative. This is the sign behind me here. I'm sitting in our ADC. The designer who said, we have a big white space, can we build you a sign? I said, yes, can you build me a sign and make it tactile? So they made it tactile, but they also made it 6 feet wide, which doesn't really help people who are blind. So creativity is also messy. And that's why people often don't like it. You'll see over here, there's a little mini version of a sign. That was the solution to having the sign behind me be too big. So because creative is inherently, or is often considered messy, you can't trust it, you can't rely on it. So you have the creative people off in the corner to go do their things, and they throw an idea over the fence, and then people build to it. The more creative thing is actually to have the engineers, the designers work together, understand the real problem, and work together on the real solutions, and then iterate it on it, because you're never going to get it right the first time. So the whole process becomes iterative, just the way, say, creativity is iterative. You have an idea, you piggyback off it, you piggyback off that, and you create something better together.
So I think, we've talked, at some length about the kind of issues with creativity, and I have a personal view that creativity is somewhat edited out of you. I just had a lunchtime meeting with someone who said, there's a point in your life when you're only taught from the head up. And I think that may be a quote from Ken Robinson. There is something here, though, of question, and it's actually in the chat, of how do we create space for creativity in leadership roles? What can we actively do to bring that in? And whilst you're thinking about it, just one other little comment. It's interesting when, we run a lot of workshops here at the centre. If you ask a group of 5-year-olds to draw their house, they'll do it. If you ask a group of 55-year-olds, they'll immediately question you about why. And simple tools of creativity, such as drawing, alternative visual forms of expression, spoken word, do get radically reduced down. So what are the things you would like to see, Minnie and Christopher? How do you think we create space for creativity, even in terms of good practice that you've come across? And I'm going to be making notes here as to all the good practice that you've seen. So Minnie, do you want to go first?
Yeah. So to some extent, it's maybe been easy for me. A lot of my career, I have led designers, creatives, marketers in teams. But again, it's about me and my role leading to create the right environment. So I've always made it really clear that anything they come and present to me, I really want to be emotionally moved by it. I want them to make me laugh. I want them to make me cry. I mean, I really meant it. Meet the brief, but then also show me what happens when you burst the lid off. To the extent where creatives have come to me, they come in to share work with me, bringing a box of tissues. They've made me, people I've worked with have made me cry lots. And that's like, yes, we made her cry. Because I gave them permission. I just said, move me, this has got to make me feel something. And so I think part of it is about giving people not only permission, but kind of a throwdown. Meet the brief, but make my toes curl, frighten me slightly, make me laugh. So that, I do think there's an enormous piece about giving permission. And also, I am very ready to share my half-baked creative ideas, and I'm not precious about them. And some of them are rubbish and some of them are okay, but to be able to share, I often talk about wet cement, to share my ideas and show I'm happy to greenhouse stuff with them is again about creating a safe space for people to be creative. And just a quick aside, because this is lovely.
Yeah.
I had the privilege of working at a fantastic innovation company called What If, and greenhousing was one of the behavioral norms of the organization. You kind of learnt it when you arrived. Very simple. A small green shoot is fragile. If you stomp on it, you'll kill it. So this notion of greenhousing, sunshine and water. So always responding to people's other ideas with yes and, you always build. And that was just ingrained. That was just ingrained in the culture, the notion of greenhousing people's ideas. And guess what? They're more likely to share their creative ideas if you don't trample on them.
100%.
Yes.
I totally love that. Christopher, sorry.
Yeah. Yes, and in addition to the permission to share your half-baked ideas, also give permission to fail, because it's okay for this. Because if you're going to share a half-baked idea, sometimes it really is half-baked, and sometimes it's actually a diamond in the rough that just needs to be worked on. So for me, what I've seen here at Google, I mean, the sign behind me is an example of this. You have permission to fail if you try to do something audacious. If you try to do something you've never done before, you are going to get it wrong. But how you handle the failure, is it, do you melt or do you rise? Do you learn from it or do you run from it? These are the things that, for me, makes a leader. Because if you're going to fail, if you're doing something hard, you will fail. But if you've created a culture where failure is okay, as long as you learn from it, you're going to have a more empowered staff. You're going to have a more empowered company, because you're giving them permission to do their best, try their hardest, live who they want to be, create the things that they need to be, and then you get to create something amazing together, because you now have each other's back, because there's no fiefdom, there's no throwing it under the bus. So having permission to fail, celebrating failure and learning from it, creates a much more creative and livable culture.
I love that, because in workshops we put some swear words on the wall that you shouldn't use, and the swear words are but and however. Because how many times have you been in a meeting and Christopher will say it should be this size, and then someone will say, yeah, that's interesting, Christopher, but. So those early shoots are so incredibly important. And wanted to shift to the final value of clarity. When we were doing the research, and we had a postdoctoral research fellow and a neuroscientist working on creative leadership, and clarity, true story, did start off from an ex-girlfriend where I was kind of wondering what happened there, and then the clarity was that I wasn't going to get clarity, and then kind of could move on. And the clarity just came from a guy sitting next to me on the plane, who saw that I was upset, ordered 2 drinks, gave me one, and he just waited for 5 minutes. Then he said, "What's her name?" And then we just talked about relationships, and he said, "What you're looking for is clarity, but you're not going to get clarity." And I thought, is this the third principle? And it just came out of the mouth of a fellow passenger. And then I realized at work, it could be clarity is oftentimes something that we're looking for. When we had this postdoctoral research fellow, she had thousands of books on creativity, a couple of hundred on empathy, and there was about 2 or 3 on clarity, including one called the clarity principle. So it was really this unsung value. And we talk about empathy being of the heart, creativity being of the hands, and clarity being of the head. So it was sort of head, heart, hands. And being a designer, I kind of like a good bit of triangulation. It's a stable structure. So when we think about clarity, just wanted to change gear a little bit and ask a personal, authentic question. But Christopher and Minnie, where do you feel your inner clarity comes from? What sort of practices do you have, or where do you look to for inner clarity when you have difficult decisions or conversations ahead? And either one of you can jump in.
Thank you, Christopher. So I can't remember where I heard this first, but that clarity is kindness. is something I've carried with me for quite some time. And it's kindness because clarity is good communication. Clarity is helping someone know the direction, know what you need or want from them. You know, if you're really, really clear, you are painting what good looks like. You're starting with the end in mind, all of those really, really good kind of mantras. So I can't remember where it came, but I've always felt it's clear. And I actually need it. I really need it and like it in my life. So I think, where does it come from when I have clarity? I think it's from a combination of fact, evidence, and instinct. So for me, it is head and heart. I kind of need to feel it's right, as well as know it's right. And then what I've, very much a work in progress, I really try to do is then give clarity in my communication with people. I really, really try, because I believe it's kindness to them. And that, I think we often think that can be tricky or challenging or too dictatorial. But I really try to give clarity. Does that make sense to you? Play it back to me. What does good look? Paint good for me, and do those things.
I love that clarity and kindness. And I just wanted to say, we will have about 10 minutes or so for questions. So please start putting them in the chat and we will pick them up. Sorry, Christopher, I cut you off.
No, I was about to say a thing. I've never heard that before. So I love that clarity is kindness. And what's interesting to me is I spend my time talking with first line engineers and designers all the way to C-suite. And the clarity is going to be different depending on who you're talking about, because different people learn and different people communicate in different ways. So you need to have this almost Google Translate in your head. Okay, when I talk to C-suite, I talk in bullets. When I talk to the people on the ground, I give them all of the context, because they're the ones who actually have to make that decisions of what gets done. So that clarity is kindness is brilliant, but you have to understand who you're talking to as well, because what would be clear to one person would not be clear to another. So that's my yes and for here. But in terms of my personal lack of clarity, you've probably noticed my brain moves very, very quickly. I have a daily meditation practice. I sit for 20 to 30 minutes every day just to shut the voices off. Because if I can't have that space, I can't have my own clarity. And it's harder for me to be clear to others. So in my case, the clarity starts with myself. I have to know what I want. And I have some tools that help me do that. And then with that awareness, I can then communicate outward, customizing to whom I'm trying to speak.
I love that. And the sharing of personal practice, I asked you both to do that, and I'm not scared of doing it myself. Another leadership practice, as you said, Minnie. And I think for myself, it's yoga, and it's injecting that little joy. What's that something that will make you smile? Whether it is a cup of tea or looking at the sky or just taking that moment or staring at a tree in the distance, because green can often stimulate your creativity. So I've got one more question before we open up to the questions are starting to roll in. And it's really this, it's something that utterly pains me. For the book, we did a bit of research where we were looking at the language that's used in leadership adverts. And bearing in mind, for us, creative leadership is a human premise. It's not just about the corporate rat race or, the kind of ladder career. So it's a human premise. It's about going within, leading yourself first, then leading others. But when you look at the language in the advert, it'll talk about budgets, management, authority, basically being a boss. And management is important, but we did an exercise 2 years ago when we asked 120 people from 34 different countries and regions what they wanted from leadership. And they said things. Number one was active listening. Number two was empathy. Then there was trust. Then there was diversity. if you each had a Harry Potter wand, how would you change that? How would you bridge that gap? Because when you're looking at the kind of asks that we're making of leaders, the kind of bars that they, the kind of people that we're looking at, and then what people are aspiring to, there's a huge gap. So how might the Harry Potter wand, and Christopher, I know you have a Harry Potter wand sitting to your left somewhere in the ADC, or to the right in the ADC. Have a little think about that. What would you do to bridge that gap?
I would want for people to realize there's a difference between being a manager and being a leader. Being a leader is something that's given to you because people respect you and trust you and love you. Being a manager is something that you're assigned. So I would want to separate leadership from management. Managers manage, leaders in the same way a farmer farms or an actor acts. It is something that you do. It's not something that you are given. It's not something you're assigned to do. It's something that you are given. You are a leader when people follow you.
Beautiful.
I totally agree on that. It's something you do. And let's face it, where we started here is there are lots of leaders currently in the world, in politics, in business, who are dreadful leaders. They are leading really, really badly with dreadful consequence. So it's certainly not something that just happens with a title. You see great leadership when children are playing. You see leadership when a bunch of people are trying to pay a bill at the end of an evening. It kind of comes in so many different ways. but it is really about your ability to bring people with you. It's about engaging, inspiring, motivating people to want to come together around a shared purpose. And very often that's done best alongside them, not in front of them, sometimes in front, sometimes behind. There's a positional, I have to mention this because there's a person I know who's on the call who is a fantastic sports leader, Fee. And just to say, it's not surprising that sport is so often one of the kind of analogies we use, or one of the things we refer to, because leading a sports team, you don't need to be the best hockey player, football, or whatever, but you're great at leading that team to win. And that's about spirit, belief, commitment, camaraderie, in it together.
Experience, talent.
Experience, talent, and the diversity. It's a beautiful metaphor for diversity, because you need someone who can score goals, someone can stop them happening. You need all of those things. So there's a lot to be learned, always, actually, from leadership in sport.
That is beautiful, and it really leads into the questions that we have going on. We have one from Meg's iPhone, probably Meg rather than her iPhone, that said, what questions would you recommend someone ask in interviews to feel out whether this style of creative, inclusive leadership is likely to thrive in an organization? So how do you sort of tease it out? I really want to know the answers to this as well.
Christopher, were you about to say something on that?
I think I have some. So for me, it is about that failure, the ability to fail. How is failure treated in the organization? Do you do postmortems? Do you do retrospectives? How do you handle the situation when things fail? Because if they say we don't fail, run. It's not a place that you want to be, because they don't allow failure. And that's not a place where you're going to be creative. That's not a place that's going to be a trusting, warm environment. So if you want to be creative, you have to be allowed to do these things wrong. And if you're not allowed to do things wrong, this is not a place where people will thrive.
Yeah, I do think in any organization, there is so much that is driven and role modeled by the leadership. So I would always be wanting to look at the leadership of the organization. How accessible are they? you know, do I get to meet them? What's the example they set? You know, asking questions about them and their behaviours.
So some good tips there. Andrew Knight is asking, you've talked a lot about kindness, which I love, but how do you make that case to top tier leaders or investors or owners or ministers? What's the value proposition for kindness?
So there is absolute hard data on this. If you link kindness to all of the Gallup research, you know, that sense of, you know, kindness truly cares about me. There is hard evidence from the Gallup research. There is also hard evidence from the Engage for Success research about the discretionary effort that then people will bring to work. So I think there's actually some really robust evidence here that a more you know, productivity is a massive issue in this country, and that affects GDR. And so there is a financial argument. Whether it will be listened to is another matter.
If I may, I think continuing on, I think we would want to also drive the conversation that kindness is not equivalent to weakness. Kindness is actually being honest. Kindness is saying, this isn't good enough. I expect more of you so you can up your game. Going back into a sports metaphor. So kindness is not weakness. So I would lean into that conversation so people don't equate them, because they're very, very different.
So I'm just looking at the RSA colleagues here. How much longer have we got?
Oh, yeah, you've got about another 6 minutes all told, maybe about 5. Yeah.
Okay. So there's sort of 2 questions really wanted to get to, and then we can sort of end with a wrap-up statement from each of you. So I'll ask the 2 questions together, and we can just you can pick the one you want to speak or speak to both of them. So one is about curiosity. How can curiosity be transformational in leadership, and how does it show up for you? And then the other question is just a great final question, which is, what is the one thing that will change the dial of a different version of creative leadership? So probably a little bit of a Harry Potter question again. What would you like to see change? So curiosity and one thing to change.
Christopher.
Okay. For me, the curiosity leans into empathy, leans into openness, because if you're uncurious, you don't care what other people have to say. So if you were a leader who's uncurious because you know everything, this is not a leader that I would want to follow, because they know their world. I'm in my mid-50s and I come from a music background. I know really interesting things that you might not know, and I have a context you may not understand. And if you never ask the questions, what do you think? Why is this important? Why do we care? You're never going to have the opportunity to learn from me or the people who are like me, or more importantly, people who don't look like me as a white middle-aged man.
That whole notion of be a learn it all, not a know it all, is just such a fundamental. And I love what Christopher said. I think the thing about curiosity as well, curiosity really, I think when it's true curiosity, really doesn't know the answer or hasn't predicted the answer or isn't hoping to justify something I already think. Real curiosity comes from a place of, I really don't know, and I really do want to know what you think. And so that notion of curiosity from what I think of often as the unseen people in an organization, the cleaners, the bottle washers, the trolley collectors at the supermarket, you know, organizations I've worked in, I've always been really particularly interested to speak to them and be curious about them and their experience and their what wisdom they have for me.
There's the leaning into vulnerability as well. To be curious is to be vulnerable, and that helps bring people to you because you're willing to say, I don't know. And if to your point, if you're just trying to validate something or decide, that's just manipulation. That's not even curiosity.
Yeah, or it's research, kind of, as opposed to
if that. Yeah,
if that.
it's interesting, you know, we started the conversation talking about hair. I think you'd mentioned Minnie, and it's such an undervalued world because, you know, and I sort of blame the movies a bit for this as well, because whenever you see any sort of mafioso type movie and someone is about to kill someone else or do something really horrible, they say it's just business. So business has almost become this byword for, hey, I can do whatever I want to you. It's just business. And before we go to your sort of final takeaways and then handing back to the RSA, I think, you know, a couple of things here is Sangeeta Nichol said great leaders are humble and empathic too. There was a study by Jim Collins, which was published in Harvard Business Review in 2001. And his book is called From Good to Great. It's over 25 years old. But that was transformational for me in my leadership, because up until that point, I believed I couldn't be a leader. I was too brown, too quiet, too introvert. My final school report actually said he won't amount to leading anything. He's suited to the quiet academic life. So when I did a TEDx talk, I sent that to my old headmaster. You know, I had to do a little bit of a mic drop, but he did say thank you for proving me wrong and took me out to lunch. But Jim Collins's work looked at 1,435 companies and only found 11 that were exceptional because of their leadership. And those CEOs had one quality, which was they were strong, but they were also humble. And that was in the 1990s, that piece of research came out. So I think, you know, we're near time. Minnie and Christopher, it's been wonderful to be with you. I just wondered if you had any final thoughts or takeaways or sentiments to share with this group.
Just lovely chatting with you in this fireside, and it was so good to meet you, Christopher. One more book, which is Brené Brown, Dare to Lead. Dare to Lead. Top tip as a read.
And for me, again, thank you. This has been fun. It's so lovely to meet you, Minnie. I've known of you for a while. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. And if I could just have one word, what expression is just be the leader that you want to be, and people will follow you. Be who you want to be. Lead with heart. Lead with hands. Read Rama's book. You'll understand how to do this right, and you'll have people follow you.
I blush a little bit when I hear that, and I think just my final word is really authenticity, because that's what all of this, you know, I think leads to, and that's what our research with those 120 people sort of led to. So with that, handing it back to our RSA colleagues and thanking you for bringing us together this Tuesday afternoon. So back to you.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've been furiously trying to keep track of all of the various resources and links and books that have been recommended. So thank you for such a really, really enriching conversation. I think a lot of people have said in the chat that they're leaving this conversation feeling uplifted and more confident in some of their future decisions as leaders. So thank you for your energy, your insights, your wisdom today. For everyone who's registered, I'll be in touch via email later today or tomorrow with all the links. It'll be a mammoth email probably. And a link to the recording. So yes, please do check in and feel free to email me if you have any questions. But thank you, Rama. Thank you, Minnie. Thank you, Christopher. Have a lovely rest of your afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world, and have a great weekend. Okay, take care of you all. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.